All right, good morning. Happy Monday after spring break to you and yours. Here we are. I'll do some more Tim O'Brien, the things they carried this morning. And we're going to concentrate really just on one story, page 85, Sweetheart of the Song Bong. If you want to pause here, go get your book, follow along. So we'll talk about it. It's one of the more anthologized stories in the novel, and kind of does a great job of encapsulating a lot of the themes and things I think that Tim O'Brien is about in this novel with regard to issues of identity, issues of narrative, authority, that kind of thing, and what it is that makes this, I would argue, a postmodern work of fiction. So again, page 85. I posted a couple days ago, or yesterday actually, I think I posted on the TOK website. If you go to the things they carried link up at the top, there's a link to a Google folder that has some folders in it that have scans. In the summer of 2011, I was in the Harry Ransom Center, the archive library at the UT Austin, for a month doing research, and they have, I was doing research primarily in David Foster Wallace, but I discovered that they have the archive. It's an ongoing archive project with Tim O'Brien, and so they have boxes of notes and journals and drafts and things pertaining to Tim O'Brien's novels. And so I looked at the box for the things they carried because I'd taught it and I would continue teaching it. And he has in there pages of like notes, almost kind of some of which read almost like explanations or drafts. And so peruse that stuff. But one of the things that was there was a little 2.5 page typed document that he wrote about Sweetheart of the Song Bong, in which he makes the claim that of all the things that are in the novel, it comes closest to the truth. He says in that little, if you read it, he says that it purportedly happened. Some version of it happened. He didn't see it. He heard about it from somebody else, which of course is the nature of narrative, right? So, and he kind of deals with that a little bit in the story, what it means to either be the eyewitness or to be the person hearing it from somebody who was the eyewitness, or extended. So anyway, that's there. There's some other stuff there that I think is worth looking at, and I will reference probably in the next video and be a point of reference. He does some interesting things. There's one folder that has some drafts in there of one of the stories, and interestingly enough, he removed a lot of profanity from an earlier draft. And then there are two short pieces, also like 2.5 page documents in there, of things that he wrote, one of which was included in the first hardback edition of the book, that's no longer there, a kind of little letter of explanation. And there's another document that's similar to that little letter of explanation. So anyway, so there's stuff there for you to look at, peruse, sort of think about. And do you want to, brings up questions? This Thursday, I'll be doing the Google Hangout thing at about 1 o'clock in the afternoon both days. You want to drop in, ask me questions about whatever, we can make that happen. So we go to the Song Bong. And one of the things, it's a theme that has come up before in our reading, and that is the issue of truth. And the issue of truth looms over this story because on the surface it seems so preposterous, right? That you are in a war zone and you just trip over your girlfriend, which seems crazy. Again, Tim O'Brien, the author, claims that he heard that somebody actually did that. And so, as the genesis for this story. And he goes to lengths here on page 85 to establish that when you hear something from Rat Kiley, that you've got to, all stories are strange in Vietnam, but then some narrators like Rat Kiley you have to really take with a huge grain of salt. So, but Kiley, as O'Brien points out in the bottom of 85, top 86, O'Kiley is working with whatever truth was there in order to really heat up the story and to make it burn. But this particular one, Rat really fought about. So we get this story that opens with discussion of truth and discussion of already thinking about narrative, right? This classic question for narratives is how true is it and how we value that. So, and one of the things that's going to come up in the conversation between Rat and Mitchell Saunders that interrupt this story multiple times is the role that narrative form plays at times in its relationship to truth and its relationship to reality. And you can think about it yourself. Think about how many moments in your life, in your daily life even, right? There's certain things that you automatically accept as being either true, and there are probably plenty of things you accept as being completely false, right? And some of that has to do with the form. Everything that you get via, every message, every text you get, you don't automatically think of that as truth, right? In large part because it's the internet, it's text messaging, it's right. It's the nature of that beast. And so, you may have a good social media antenna, and so you question things. Whereas say like, I don't know, an actual handwritten letter especially from a relative or a friend, you probably put a lot more stock in that. Things that show up in the newspaper, things that show up in certain publications, we accept as we count on them being true. Things that are, I don't know, just hearsay that make the rounds, used to make the rounds in the quad about teachers or whatever, right? Maybe not so true. Anytime you hear a sentence like, that's just how things are done, or that's not how things are done, really part of what that argument is based on, whatever argument follows that statement, is going to be an argument about form, right? And so there's certain forms that we give credibility to and others that we don't. And you might think about which ones those are in your life. So that's where the story opens, right? With that kind of discussion. Page 85, 86. We start to get this background, through the next several pages, the narrator background, and then, then there's the arrival. Marianne shows up. 6 weeks, page 89. 6 weeks later, his girlfriend showed up. Single sentence paragraph. And what we realize in a certain sort of way is what, in a sense, could have been the whole story, how to get your girlfriend to Nam, what that entailed, all that kind of stuff. O'Brien's not really that interested in that, right? I mean, that's not the story. What would have been the surprise ending? Ta-da, Marianne. That's not the whole story at all, right? It's about what happens after that. So the surprise is, in a sense, delayed. So this girl shows up. Marianne Bell shows up in Nam, hanging out, 17 years old, right? Shacking up with her boyfriend, presumably who's 18, 19 years old, right? Out there at this relatively peaceful sort of space. And what we start, she is fine with it. She enjoys it. She, reunited with her boyfriend, all that kind of stuff. And she gets to put on a little show, right? She gets to be the center of attention. She's like the only girl there, right? An apparently attractive girl. But then she starts to want a certain kind of education. She wants to know, not just about what the soldiers do, but about the place itself and the war, the land too, page 91, and the mystery. She wants to go visit the village. She wants to see how people live. She wants to encounter, in a sense, the other. And it's especially at this moment, right, I want to start to argue that there is something about the structure of this story and the content of this story that begins to mirror, mimic, or use at least as a reference point, Heart of Darkness, right? You go to someplace different. You're of a certain kind, you have a certain identity, an American teenager, you go to someplace completely different, right? And what happens? For most men over there, like Mark Fosse, you hang on to those traditions. You hang on to what was, and what you remember and how you think about it. But not Marianne. And in part because not in postmodernist times, right? If identity which was once in a traditional mindset was thought of as like kind of etched. It is what it is. This is it. Is that way? Postmodernism is going to argue, no, completely malleable. You can change it. And so what we get to see on pages 91, 92, right, is that kind of 93, is that kind of shifting in Marianne. And also the other thing that happens is that Kylie begins to lay the groundwork for what is an interesting argument coming from what we might think of as a stereotypical soldier, and that is Kylie's perfectly happy with the dissolution of gender roles. Right? She wasn't dumb, he'd snapped top of 93. I never said that. Young, that's all I said. Like you and me, a girl, that's the only difference. And I'll tell you something, it didn't amount to jack. I mean, when we first got here, all of us, we were really young and innocent, full of romantic bullshit, but we learned pretty damn quick, and so did Marianne. Right? So he's starting to lay the ground for this really interesting argument that gender too can almost be like a kind of identity that is changeable. Okay. So, right, but also in the midst of this education, we get a kind of more traditional foreshadowing moment. Eddie Diamond says, page 92, bottom right before the break, there's the scary part. I promise you, this girl will most definitely learn. And that's really the story, is about the education of Marianne Bell and how she goes from high school senior from Cleveland Heights to something out beyond what the Green Berets are like, right? It's just kind of extreme distance, not unlike, say, Kurtz goes over as one thing to the Congo and becomes something else entirely. Page 94. The interesting thing that Kylie builds into the story is on 93, 94 is that you get the couple, Mark and Marianne, in terms of identities, are kind of opposites. He's the traditionalist, right? The male, the soldier, the guy who's, been there and seen the stuff, though he's the one hanging on these kind of traditional values: marriage, wife, homemaker, home, these kinds of things. And while it was a lark to bring her over, it's time for her to go home. Right? And Marianne pushes back, says, everything I want is right here. No, I'm not really that interested in going back home right now. And he doesn't really know how to deal with that, right? And it's a kind of nice little encapsulation of what happens when you have these traditional values that run up against this new shifting, this new way of the world, post-World War II, the rise of postmodernism. And on the bottom of 95, Rat brings that to the fore. When Marianne doesn't come home one night, right? The next morning, Fosse is collapsed. He squatted down, rocking on his heels, still clutching the flashlight. Just a boy, 18 years old, tall and blonde, a gifted athlete, a nice kid too, polite and good-hearted. Although for the moment, none of it seemed to be serving him well. All these identities that we have, right? What it means to be tall, blonde, what it means to be a gifted athlete, a nice kid, white. All these identities that we wear and we think will serve us, when at all times, right? What happens? There are times when identity doesn't serve us. What we've crafted as our definition of who we are doesn't come through in the clutch. And so this story is, in one sense, that's one of the sub-themes of the story, I think, is that struggle. Page 95, traditional identity fails. And we get to page 97, and this is where you have this great little moment, right, where there's this interruption in the text, where Rat stops and has a question, kind of a quiz, so to speak, for his audience. And Saunders, of course, aces it. But what's interesting is not because Saunders is able to point back to some sort of clue, per se, in the story, something that Rat said. Rather, Saunders aces the little quiz that Kylie gives him because he understands how narratives work. He says, that's how stories ought to go, right? So when he says, where'd Marianne go? And Saunders says, the Greenies. Kylie goes, yeah. And Saunders says, yeah, there's no other option. Besides, he says, you built it into the story. It was there. It had to be there for a reason, right? This is what, and you already, the logic behind this is logic that you as a student, especially a senior, are familiar with. You understand writing to be really hard work. You don't like it, you resist it. And it's not because it's somehow, what's painful about it is that it's hard work, right? I mean, thought and trying to translate the brain to the page, and it's right? I mean, that's how it is. And so writers, they're no different. They think of writing as hard work as well. And so if they're going to put something in the story, then they're always going to use it. It's always there for a purpose. Nothing is just floating around. I got bored one day, so I cranked out 300 words on this. No, right? It's built in and this works, the Hollywood movies, the same way. Things that are in the movies early on, there's a reason for that much later. So, Saunders gets it. Saunders is a student of narrative, right? A good, and especially post-World War II student of narrative, who understands how narratives work. And then of course, there's the whole having a conversation about narrative makes it a meta-narrative, right? Part of the story, Sweet or the Song Bong, is about stories. And so we get that postmodernist aspect, this break in the action, which is a different break than the breaks we had in a modernist story like Heart of Darkness, right? Those breaks had to do largely with the content of the story. And there was one of them was about a protest about language that Marlowe was using, but it wasn't because of how stories were worked, it was because the audience member was taking offense, right? That's a different interruption. This interruption is an interruption to identify both what's being told as a narrative and to talk about narrative. So this sort of self-referential treatment is hallmark of postmodernism. And here, in a sense, is the surprise ending, right? Not that she, Mark Fosse was able to get Marianne Bell over to Nam, it's that she winds up becoming a Green Beret. Ta-da. So we got this moment here where the narrative is interrupted, and which is a lot like the whole novel itself, right? Tim O'Brien keeps interrupting the flow. Some of you have expressed to me the difficulty or the frustration, maybe annoyance you've had with the work because it doesn't have that smooth arc that we're used to, and in a sense, that's perhaps, Tim O'Brien might say that's the nature of Vietnam. At one point earlier on, he talked about Vietnam being like long moments of boredom with these brief moments of just sheer terror. These kind of interruptions to the way things are. So what constitutes, just any kind of story that, for Tim O'Brien perhaps is going to be one that is interruptible, self-referential, is going to be one that is identifiable as a narrative. Page 99, the very bottom of it. So Fosse goes in, lays down the traditional law. You will be my wife. You will be a good homemaker. She starts dressing again, like she should dress, like a traditional high school senior, bride-to-be should dress. And what O'Brien does brilliantly on the bottom of 99 is he identifies those as masks, right? In the presence of others, at least, they kept on their masks. They talked about meals for a huge wedding. They talked about flowers, blah, 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 that kind of thing, right? And this idea that, again, if she took it off, even temporarily, she can put it back on, right? That there's who she was is not etched in stone. But once you've opened up that idea, right, how's it going to stay? So, and in a way, a little note here. So identity becomes malleable. You can change it, right? You can put on something different. You can be one thing, but later be something else, which is, in a sense, we don't drive this point home, I think, in our culture, but it's in a sense what's going on with you. You were a student, high school, K-12 student, now you're going to be some kind of college student, right? Which is going to be a big identity shift. Um, and then, of course, there's this pandemic, right, which has altered identities yet again, and maybe help to make us see a little bit the malleability of identity. Who is it that we want to be? Who do we want to become? Both you and I, right? What does it mean to be a student in this day and age? What does it mean to be a teacher in this day and age? What does it mean to be a high school senior? You know, but in a certain sort of way, those questions are being asked at a national level, especially given the last 3-4 days. Who do we want to be as a country? Who do we want to be as a people? Right? We have a chance to explore that identity. And just because we were one thing doesn't mean we have to go back to being that thing. It may not even be possible to go back to being that thing. Right? So what is it? Who is it that we want to be? It's probably, I would argue, a real significant question to ask, because you're going to be the ones answering it largely. Over the next 10, 20 years, you're going to decide, the consequences of what we're going through now, in a certain sort of way, are going to be laid out. You get to have a large role in weighing those out and shaping it the way you want to be, not the least of which is because you get to vote in November, right? So you can make your voice heard. All right, PSA is over. Back to work. On page 100, right, you saw this coming. You heard me mention Heart of Darkness. You had to know this was coming, right? The wilderness, middle of the page, seemed to draw her in. Haunted look, Rat said, partly terror, partly rapture. There's no way you're going to get me to believe that Tim O'Brien is not thinking about Kurtz, or Colonel Kurtz for that matter, when he wrote those two sentences, right? This idea of the wilderness being a force, being an entity. I mean, it's not for naught that Coppola set Heart of Darkness, the telling of it in the Vietnam War, right? Here is a real encounter that we experienced with nature, with the wilderness. So we get, again, reference of the sort of referential. Page 101, we get more conversation about the art of storytelling, interrupting the text, stopping, inserting things, which is what O'Brien's been doing for the whole novel. It bugs Mitchell, probably bugs you as a reader, but it's, that kind of self-awareness again. Page 102, when he gets ready to rejoin the story, close, right, he does make another argument again for gender fluidity, gender identity, and he even identifies it as blinders, right? See what I mean? What's so impossible about it? She was a girl, that's all. I mean, if it was a guy, everybody'd say, hey, no big deal. He got caught up in that nom shit, got seduced by the greenies. See what I mean? You got these blinders on about women, about how gentle and peaceful they are. All that crap about how if we had a woman for president, there wouldn't be any more wars. Pure garbage. You got to get rid of that sexist attitude. Again, knocking at those traditional roles, those traditional boundary lines, questioning authority, questioning the way in which we've structured things. Postmodernist move. Saunders, of course, is more concerned with the narrative construction, talking about, and he uses Mitchell wrecking the whole tone of the story. Right, so we get, I'm going to say page 103 is a little oblique reference to both Heart of Darkness and John Cage, The Noise of Nature. You like that? Two. Good stuff. Page 106, let's move ahead, right? Page 106, when they finally have the confrontation, right? When they, when Mark Fosse and Marianne Bell finally, she is going over to the other side and he is struggling bad. And they have this final conversation, right? When he's, she tells him, you're in a place on page 106 where you don't belong. She moved her hand in a gesture that encompassed not just the hooch, but everything around it, the entire war, the mountains, the mean little villages, the trails and trees and rivers and deep misted over valleys. You just don't know. You hide in this little fortress behind wire and sandbags, and you just don't know. Sometimes I want to eat this place, the whole country, the dirt, the death. I just want to swallow it and have it there inside me. You may not remember because you barely read it one time, but if you read Heart of Darkness often enough, you remember that at one point Marlowe says about Kurtz, he says, he swallowed the earth whole. He swallowed the wilderness entirely, right? This idea of taking this thing so into you that you, in a sense, become the thing. Is very much a Conradian idea that O'Brien is making use of. And when we get to page 107, right, and Mark Fosse's left standing there, you know, because she's gone back into the Green Berets, you know, he says, do something, he whispered. I just can't let her go like that. Rat listened a long time and shook his head. Man, you must be deaf. She's already gone. And in a sense, right, again, I'm going to suggest to you that that's not unlike Kurtz kicking himself loose from the earth, right? This kind of abandonment of traditional mores. But here it's in a much more complicated sort of way, which I think is the difference between modernism and postmodernism. You know, for Kurtz, it was abandonment of traditional values, traditional ethics. Here it's an abandonment, you know, but he still kept an identity. He installed himself as a god, right? He replaced one god with another god. Here, though, she's not interested in that, right? It's not Marianne taking over the Green Beret, Marianne going out and redefining again herself, right? Exploring those kind of boundaries that don't really, you know, if postmodernism is to exist, you know, be trusted, don't exist. Right? You can continually remake yourself. And it's at that moment on 107, which is where Rat Kiley traditionally stops, but Mitchell Saunders won't have it, right? And again, Jesus Christ, it's against the rules, Saunders said, against human nature, the elaborate story. You can't say, hey, by the way, I don't know the ending. I mean, you got certain obligations. You got thousands of years of storytelling that you're obligated to. Is what he's really saying there. Stories have a beginning, a middle, and an end. If you're a traditionalist, if you're a postmodernist, what is an ending really, right? I mean, even most, you know, people on the planet don't even think that death is the end. So what is an ending? So the rules of narrative being challenged, you know, and that's kind of in part really what I think Rat's talking about, right? Is that things are not the way that they used to be. They're not the way that they seem. We close out on page 109, 110. We get to the end of the story, and it's kind of, you know, the telling, at least, as O'Brien sees it, comes to an end with just really what are, for lack of a better word, a couple of morals, right? You come over clean and you get dirty, and then afterward, it's never the same. Once you've gone through something, once you've experienced something, it's never the same. I'll slide in some Buddhism here, right? Buddhism would argue that that takes place all the time, every day, every second is different, and you're never the same for having gone through it, right? Sometimes it takes a bigger action, Vietnam War, pandemic, to realize things are never the same, but they're never the same. It was as if she were taunting some wild creature out there in the bush or in her head, inviting it to show herself, a curious game of hide and seek, right? So that she loses herself. Even the Green Berets aren't enough for her, right? And she was lost inside herself, which again is reminiscent of what Conrad wrote about, what Marlowe says about Kurtz, right? He was lost inside himself. In part because Kurtz couldn't go the whole distance. Marianne goes the whole distance. She disappears, never to be seen from again. Just a felt present. The whole rainforest on page 110, the whole rainforest seemed to stare in at them, a watched feeling. She'd crossed to the other side. She was part of the land, right? Marianne becomes, in a sense, just part of it, whatever that is, part of that wilderness that Kurtz took his orders from, but was scared of. Not Marianne. She goes totally into it. So you have this narrative that in a way, perhaps, I don't know, maybe that feels inconclusive, right? I mean, Fosse gets busted. We know what happens in a sense on the surface to people. But for Marianne, something deeper happens. And I think in a sort of extension, what Rad is also suggesting, and Tim O'Brien, the author, is that narratives do something to us as people as well, even as recipients of stories, right? That they change us. A really close friend of mine, who's an English professor, and used to call literature secular scripture. You know, and his argument was you read it the way that you go to it for support, for moral, for clarity, for advice, for all kinds of things. And in the act of reading it, though, like reading scripture, it changes you because you've taken the story inside of you. So maybe the question asked now is, you know, what is this story? And what are all the narratives over the years, the last 12, 13 years that you've taken inside you? What have they done to you, right? You might want to spend some time reflecting on your identity and the stories. Maybe you can identify some stories that matter to you, that have shaped you the way that they, you know, maybe there aren't stories from school, there's stories from other places, religious text, or, you know, I don't know, scouting manuals, whatever it is. But, you know, what are the stories that you tell yourself that make you who you are? All right, that's what I got for today. I'm going to try to post another one maybe on Wednesday, and that one I'm going to cover a lot of ground because I'm going to try to finish the novel. I'd like to talk about Kyle Gann and Johnny Cage and postmodernism. I'd like to do like a little podcasty thing with music, talking about the rise of postmodernist music. What is it? Just keep moving, keep pushing, things like that. So I'm going to keep moving forward. I'm going to keep posting. I'm going to try to have at least 2 Google Hangouts a week. I'll post them the weekend before the week. At the latest, so you can sort of know. This week, Tuesday, Thursday, 1 o'clock, Google Hangouts. Be there. All right, y'all. Have a good, stay safe, social distance, be mindful, be well.